Chapter 7. The Awakening to Intuition. When the student has finished his breathing exercise, he is ready for the next stage of this practice, the next effort which he is asked to put forth. If he has practiced this exercise properly and with success, he will catch the mind like a bird in a net, its constant flight stopped, its restless activity quiet, so that it lies within the net of breath control without a flutter of its wings. He should not attempt to revert back to normal breathing by means of an effort. Rather, should he let his breathing process adjust itself naturally. His mind is now to be withdrawn from concentrating upon the breath that turned away towards the next step, the awakening to intuition. I say to intuition advisedly because the latter is always present, unsleeping, and needs no awakening. He begins by reverting to the questioning and searching attitude which he adopted during the meditation, but this time his interrogation is addressed not to the body, desires, or thoughts, but to the mysterious darkness which environs his mind. Who am I? Who is this being that dwells within this body? Let him address these silent questions to himself slowly, intently, and with utter concentration of the soul. Then let him wait a few minutes, meditating quietly and without effort upon these questions. Thereafter, let him make a silent, humble request, a half prayer, if he wishes, directed to the Overself in the very center of his being, to reveal its existence to him. The words in which he formulates this request may be his own, but they should be simple, brief, and direct. Let him ask as though he were addressing an intimate friend and a true one. Ask, and it shall be given unto you, was the direction of Jesus, whose consciousness was purely that of the Overself to his hearers. Having made the request or silently uttered the prayer, let him pause and wait expectantly, even confidently, for a response. I may say confidently, yet withal there should be a profound humility in his soul when he is asking for the divine revelation to come to him. Humility is the first step on the secret path, and it will also be the last. For before the divinity can begin to teach him through its own self-revelation, he must first become teachable, i.e., humble. Intellectual ability and learning are admirable things and adorn a man, but intellectual pride puts up a strong barrier between him and that higher life which is ever calling to him, albeit silently. The intellectually proud sit upon their puny pedestals and wait to be worshipped, when all the while there is a deity dwelling in the deeps of their hearts who is alone worthy to receive worship. The intellectual self seeks to strut like a proud peacock before the admiring gaze of the world. But the true begetter of its talents and creator of our achievements, the one who permeates it with the principle of life and thus permits it to exist, is quite content to remain in the background, unknown and unnoticed by men. It is the hardest of tasks to abase oneself to a realization of one's own littleness, ignorance, and vanity. Yet it is the greatest of attainments, for it leads directly to that finding of the divine life which Christ promised all who would lose the personal life. We do not need the knowledge and culture of a distinguished mind to understand and appreciate these teachings. The simple and untutored and the primitive can as readily enter into them by an act of faith and prayer, and can be more easily enter into the mood of reverence. When we approach the Overself by the path of self-inquiry, the matured studies of the philosopher avail him little over the man in the street. This is not because such studies are valueless. On the contrary, they train the mind in useful habits of abstraction, concentration, and depth. It is because they engender a pride of learning and an egotism of self-importance which erect gates across the true path. The mastery of a dozen different systems of intricate philosophy is not a task for the many, yet the mastery of a personal pride is infinitely harder. Humility comes more easily to the illiterate and ignorant because they are conscious of their mental and social inferiority. and humility is essential at every stage of the secret path. The great elemental secrets of life are so simple that few see them. People are complicated. Intellects are complicated, not life. Therefore I say, treasure in your heart and carry in your mind the memorable saying of Jesus that, except ye become as a little child, yet shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. Tremendous theological speculations are not necessary to understand the simple truths of the Spirit. Hitherto, all the student's efforts at finding the true self have been positively directed, personally willed, conscious, and voluntary. He is now almost at the point where there should be a complete reversal of procedure, where the personality must cease making any further efforts because it has reached the end of its tether. The whole process of meditation is simply to select this one higher topic of self-inquiry out of the multitude of ideas, to think firmly upon that alone and of nothing else. Then, when the attitude and quality of concentration are thus strongly developed, the student drops even this special line of thinking, withdraws inward, and questions who it is that is thinking. He does not endeavor to obtain an answer by thinking about the thinker. He begins to let all thoughts drop away and to fasten his full attention on becoming aware of this being who has been covered over by a screen of never-ending thoughts. During this pause which follows his silent request, he should suspend his thoughts so far as he can by adopting an attitude of listening in for a response. After waiting for 2 or 3 minutes, he may repeat his request and then pause again. After the second waiting period of 3 or 4 minutes, he may repeat it for a third and final time. Then he should wait patiently, expectantly, for a period of about 5 minutes, his body still, his breathing slow and quiet, his mind becalmed. This ends his meditation. The key to a correct understanding of this stage is in remembering that it is the subconscious reaction to your conscious effort which is now all important. The conscious practice of mental quiet has been useful in sharpening attention. It is like ringing a doorbell. Now you must wait for the subconscious to make its appearance. Do not overstrain, do not overdo. Give the overself some credit for intelligence of its own, for action of its own. You may pass through a period when no response comes, when empty nothingness alone reigns supreme within your soul. Before you leave this no man's land of the soul, a feeling of intense loneliness may overcome you. Nevertheless, it will eventually pass away. If you are not prepared to exercise patience while working silently for this revelation, you defeat any possibility of success. Patience is important. We must wait humbly for the revelation of the infinity which is within man. Until that sacred hour, we are poor orphans. Those who introduce any element of impatience into their period of mental quiet are merely handicapping themselves. Henceforth, the student must watch carefully for the first confirmatory signs and tokens that he is upon the right way. The first faint evidences of the stirrings of his deeper self within him. Such signs and tokens are shown us by the soul, and they are often misunderstood or simply not noticed. They come quietly as the sun steals into a darkened world, so quietly that he is likely to dismiss them as useless fantasies, meaningless thoughts, or unimportant imaginings. This would be a great error. The overself's voice is first heard like a soft breath. He must pay full heed to it. The gentlest stirrings within the heart must receive his full and undivided attention, and he must look upon them with respect and veneration as ambassadors from a higher realm. For those quiet monitors are but heralds of a dynamic force which is yet to come and which will transfuse and interpenetrate his body with heavenly power. There are certain subtle tones of feeling, delicate shades of thought, which are usually unnoticed, overlooked, or dismissed in ordinary daily life. These disregarded experiences are the very things the meditator must seize upon for culture and development. He will focus all his power of attention on them whenever they appear, striving to yield himself up to them utterly. In such moments, he discovers what is almost a second self within. These moments may be rare. He may not even get them except at irregular intervals, but their existence evidences something that is. These ecstatic moments provide a clue to the true nature of man. Within every single one of us lies well upon well of spiritual peace untapped, of spiritual intelligence untouched. From time to time, whispers come to us from this second self, whispers that urge us to practice self-control, to take a higher path, and to transcend selfishness. We must heed those whispers and exploit those rare moments. They give us glimpses of what we may become. If these moments, when this spiritual perception flashes across us, could be extended, happiness eternal would be ours. For there is something which occasionally makes itself felt in this manner in the mysterious depths of the soul. What it is, we hardly know, but what it says we may know. All that is best in thee, that am I, is its silent voice. It is one with us, yet sainted and set apart. The object of this work in mental quiet is to enter a realm which psychologists often denominate as unconscious. The response of awakening intuition may come the first time this exercise is practiced, or it may not come until after several weeks or even months of daily practice. The student who has completely mastered all of the earlier stages is now in a position to benefit markedly by the help of a genuine adept, who can now rapidly bring the intuition to birth for him by certain secret methods. If such a meeting is possible or impractical, because the findings of genuine adepts is exceedingly difficult in the modern world, then he must continue to adhere faithfully to the instructions given here. You may considerably assist your development at this stage by beginning to watch yourself at odd times during the day. You may stop yourself almost unexpectedly and observe what you are doing, feeling, saying, or thinking, letting your self-observation be made in a detached, impartial, and impersonal spirit. Who is doing this? Who is feeling this emotion? Who is speaking these words? Who is thinking these thoughts? Put such silent questions to yourself as often as you wish, but put them abruptly, suddenly, and then wait expectantly, quietly, for some intuitive inner response. So far as you can, drop all thoughts during this pause. Such introspective inquiry need not occupy you more than a minute or two at odd times. The placid breathing may profitably be induced in conjunction with this exercise in self-observation and self-inquiry. In this manner, you will begin to break up the complacent attitude which accepts the personal self's body-based outlook, and to free yourself from the illusion that the outer person is the complete being of a man. The practice of suddenly observing oneself, one's desires, moods, and actions is especially valuable because it tends to separate the thoughts and desires from the sense of selfhood which normally inheres in them, and thus tends to keep consciousness from being everlastingly drowned in the sea of the five physical senses. Furthermore, it will reinforce in a helpful manner the work which is being done to penetrate the so-called unconscious during the periods of mental quiet. Indeed, it might be said that the three practices, self-observation, daily quiet, and placid breathing, are complementary. All aim at overcoming the tendencies towards complete self-identification with the body, the desires, and the intellect, which are today regarded as normal and natural. The human race has yielded to such tendencies since time immemorial, and thus the common identification of self with body has arisen. The cure lies in gradually erasing these tendencies by repeated quest of the true self, the overself, in times of mental quiet, and by constant self-observation at odd times during the day. No matter how deeply fixed in oneself these tendencies are, they can gradually be smoothed away by means of these practices. The intellect, which is repeatedly turned inwards upon this inquiry, yields in time to habit and automatically begins to present our changing emotions, desires, thoughts, and actions to us in the light of the Overself, i.e., as things which are being experienced within ourselves but are merely mechanical responses to external stimuli. One inevitable result of all these practices will be that your attitude towards things, people, and events will gradually change. You will begin to express the qualities which are natural to the Overself, the qualities of noble outlook, perfect justice, the treatment of one's neighbor as oneself. Turn your mind repeatedly to that which is the silent spectator within yourself and fix it there. This inward turning is a mental process, an intellectual activity based on an attitude of self-inquiry. But in the stage which follows, there is a yielding up of all thoughts to the intuitive feeling which arises from within and which leads one's awareness to the innermost. You have always been exercising your intellect and emotions, rarely your intuition. Henceforth, you must begin to change this by bringing your intuitive feeling out of latency as often as possible. It will take time, this search after the right intuition amid the medley of feelings and thoughts which normally compose our inner selves, but persistent inquiry will find it out. There is no moment of the day when you may not profitably divert the current of thought and seek within yourself to ascertain the Overself. You must begin to ride the horse of mind and drive it in an inward direction. You will begin this quest in the ordinary state of spiritual darkness, in the ordinary condition of self-oblivion, the victim of mechanically aroused desires and repulsions. But if you continue with these practices, you will gradually feel your way inwards to greater freedom. There is no happiness for the man who is not free. Whether a king imprisoned by his duties in the palace, or a convict tied to a prison cell, it is a truism that the soul loves freedom. Here we have a clue to the nature of true happiness. Eternal and unchanging liberty must be a part of nature, and a liberty of this rare kind can be found nowhere else except in the Overself. One proceeds thus by imperceptible degrees to follow thought back to its unseen home. So long as you are in bondage to thinking, so long does intuition lie beyond your reach. Follow the way of constant self-inquiry, and you will make even thinking serve you as a means to freedom. And the very questions you put yourself will be stepping stones to the questionless state of Overself. You will better understand the rationale of the threefold practice, mental quiet, placid breathing, and self-observation, by studying the following picture of man's relation to his Overself. We may say that the person exists by virtue of, through the life force of, and by permission of the Overself. The thoughts and desires and resulting actions of a person are normally almost entirely occupied with things belonging to the external world. We may picture the personal self sitting inside man's body and constantly engaged in viewing the world around through the doorway of the 5 physical sense organs. The result of this preoccupation with outside objects is that it is constantly attracted or repelled, as the case may be, busily thinking, desiring, or setting the body to action, until it has entirely forgotten its place of birth, which is the Overself. Thus it has fallen into the ironical position of a being which has not only lost all memory of its father, but actually denies the possibility of the very existence of that father. That out of which thoughts arise is the true being of man, the true self. There is an unknown and unnoticed gap between every 2 thoughts, between every 2 breaths, wherein man pauses momentarily for the flimsiest fraction of a second. During that pause, which flashes by with such immeasurable rapidity, he returns to his primal self and rests anew in his real being. If this were not so, if this did not happen thousands of times a day, man could not continue to exist, and his body would fall dead to the ground, an insentient piece of matter. For the Overself is the hidden source of his life. Its force sustains and maintains him, and these constant returns to it enable man to pick up the life power which he needs for living, for thinking, and for feeling. These tiny fragments of time are experienced by everyone, but recognized at their true worth by few. That is eternally, but you, this personal self, exist, come out of it for a time only. Fixing your attention upon the question, who am I, and attempting to pursue its solution with all the ardor you can command, a time will come one day during your half-hour practice of mental quiet when you shall be so deeply engrossed in this effort as to be largely unmindful of what is around you. This condition of intense reverie provides you with the appropriate state wherein the great event of self-revelation can take place. As a matter of fact, to obtain access to one's own soul, it is not such a rare feat as it may seem. Many prepare the appropriate conditions for it unawares. The artist, when he abstracts his mind from external surroundings in the rapt absorption of his art, does it. He touches ecstasy in a minor measure, forgets himself in his work or vision. It is in this state that geniuses have achieved their finest creations, their best work. When I am, as it were, completely myself, entirely alone, and of good cheer, it is on such occasions that my ideas flow best and most abundantly. Whence and how they come I know not, nor can I force them. Mozart confessed to a friend. The writer, lost in reverie over his theme, his mind sunk so deeply in a single train of thoughts that he fails to recognize things, persons, or events that are about him. The painter, so profoundly absorbed in contemplating the picture he is making that he is oblivious of the hours, and above all, the musician wrapped in the ardor of musical composition. All these are unconsciously practicing meditation. But you, who follow the path of self-inquiry, are doing it consciously. When Leonardo da Vinci was at a loss for creative ideas, he would look into the heap of ashes and the concentration involved would usually succeed in developing a reverie wherein the ideas he needed were born. A kind of waking trance I have frequently had quite from boyhood when I have been all alone, wrote England's poet laureate, Lord Tennyson, in a letter to a friend. Out of the intensity of the consciousness of the individuality itself seemed to dissolve and fade away into boundless being. And this not a confused state, but the clearest of the clear, the surest of the surest, utterly beyond words, where death was an almost laughable impossibility, the loss of personality, if so it were, seeming no extinction but the only true life. Tennyson expressed a similar idea in a beautiful verse. If thou wouldst hear the nameless, and wilt dive into the temple cave of thine own self, there, brooding by the central altar, thou mayest haply learn the name hath a voice, by which thou wilt abide, if thou be wise. Sir Isaac Newton late one morning was found sitting half-dressed in bed, sunk in meditation, and on another occasion remained for a long time in his cellar, where a train of thought had taken possession of him while in the act of fetching a bottle of wine for his guests. Lord Kitchener had moods of brown studies, where his eyes turned up on their axes as though gazing at the root of his nose. He would then appear quite unaware of what was going on around him. He emerged from these moods in a condition of inspired understanding. As concentration deepens, the external world is slowly forgotten. The mental chambers become empty of every thought, save this dominant expectancy of a response from the inner self. It is a species of self-hypnotism, if you like, but it works, and its value is to be judged by its results. At this stage, you will cease all striving. You will not try to achieve anything, but rather allow something to be achieved in you. You will let go of the arguing intellect and yield to faith, the holy expectancy, to sublime trust. For henceforth, whatever will be done is to be done by divine action and not your own. You question things no longer, but submit, questionless, to that which is to appeal to your inmost being. Allow this inner being to take possession of you, to take control of you. We instinctively waver and recoil from that mysterious state wherein the senses are almost suspended. But do not fear. Thoughts no longer leap through the mind, but die down into a slow procession as the meditative mood deepens. Silence is God, says a French writer. Yes, but silence of body, of thoughts, of desires, not merely oral science. In this sublime moment, God is beginning to take possession of your soul. All you have to do is to practice the utmost self-surrender. To sit in this listening quietude, following the thread of intuition, is a strange experience. The world machine seems to slow down, and within this point, that is yourself, the absolute, begins to emerge. This is the mysterious and momentous hour when the mind first breaks out of its self-created chrysalis. The response to your silent invocation comes at first in the form of a faint and at first impalpable intuition, an inleading. Guided by the Aradian thread of awakening, intuition, you are being brought to your own native hearth. Or it may first take shape as a message which will be impressed upon the mind in vivid words. In that case, you will find a strange temple within yourself, a temple wherein you will be both preacher and hearer. A mysterious condition gradually arises wherein one becomes strangely aware of this otherness. It is as if one part of your nature watches what the other part does. He that finds this sacred unseen threshold is indeed fortunate, for few there be that find it. Yet they are the few who know that man's best and highest wishes fall short indeed of the treasure he is yet to attain. Or the vision of a shining symbolic picture may pattern itself before your mind's eye. You may see a cross with a circle standing out in glorious colors, or a radiant five-pointed star. Or you may experience nothing more than a melting tenderness of the heart, a gentle sensation of sinking inward into a beautiful rest. Those who spend the years soliciting some intimation or revelation from the august guest within will with time receive a ritual reward. A single glimpse of that mysterious stranger takes the troubles out of our life and puts them under our feet. One hallowed word from this oracular lips bestows a bliss which melts our smaller self in cosmic joy. The great De Beer diamond fields of South Africa were discovered through a child picking out of the wall of an old Dutch farm a small coloured pebble. Out of a wall which was for years and years had been passed and repassed by many thousands of times by people blind to the treasure at their elbows. How many people have heard the gentle whisper of the inner self or felt its faint guidance, only to brush the visitants aside without understanding? How many have dismissed as mere thoughts the early intimations of divine life? For this magnetic center deeply buried in the flesh of man, which constitutes his real essential nature, which is the father of all his finer deeds, sometimes reveals its presence in nothing more tangible than such delicate monitions. The greatest truths sometimes come unheralded into the mind. We know only that yesterday we could not accept them, but today we hold them gladly. So it is with a man when the first rays of the sun of immortality begin to fall upon him. You will find, if you yield yourself still further to these sensations, that you will be less inclined to billow the mind with waves of thought, that you will silently give them the command to be still. Thoughts will come and go with increasing slowness. Do not hesitate to let all thinking stop if you can. But this represents a point which is highly advanced, a point which one must not strive for, as in that case only an artificial blankness will ensure. It must and does come from its own accord through the inner workings of the subconscious spiritual self. The stoppage of thought is not necessarily a means of attaining the consciousness of our divine self. If that were so, epileptics would have the spiritual power of a Christ, and lunatics would possess the wisdom of a Buddha. But what is true is that we have covered over our divine nature with thoughts and desires. Therefore, we must proceed to uncover it if we would know it. Hence the difference, and a very vital one, between the lunatic who stares with glassy eyes into vacancy and the mystic who stares with shining eyes into seemingly vacancy, is the difference between one who has lost the power to think but has not attained to the knowledge of the inner self, and the one who has conquered the tyranny of thought and can suspend its action at will, while consciously being aware of his true self. Thinking as we ordinarily know, it is a heavy veil flung over the beautiful face of the divinity within us. Raise the veil a little by letting the mind come to rest as a ship glides into harbor and then is still, and you will perceive somewhat of a beauty you can never forget. Is the conscious sensation of thought really possible? The best answer to this question is an appeal to direct experience. Men who have explored the mind's depths have ultimately reached a point where they have been compelled to stop their search, for their thought has been held in a state of suspension. For the mind may be likened to a wheel in constant motion, and thought is simply the automatic result of this motion. When the wheel is brought to a dead end, all thinking is sure to cease. Many experienced people will object that to stop thinking is to stop consciousness. The actual experience of the process reveals that this is not so, that a new and extremely vivid awareness heightens our normal consciousness. We need to differentiate pure consciousness from the faculty of thinking. Death is the secret of life. We must empty ourselves if we would be filled. When the mind has poured out all its thoughts, a vacuum is created, but this can last only for a few seconds. Then a mysterious influx of divine life will enter. This is the descent of the Holy Ghost. It is in this state of conscious cessation of thought that the truth of oneself, heretofore hidden from us by activity, desires, and thoughts, becomes revealed in its sublime and spiritual grandeur. Stop the stream of thoughts if you can, and gaze steadily at the thinker. Let the intellect take its repose, and watch attentively the vacuum in consciousness which would appear to be left. The overself consciousness is equivalent to the deep, dreamless sleep state, with all its refreshment and peace, but instead of darkness and oblivion, there is complete awareness. If we can only succeed in lifting the veil of unconsciousness which hangs over deep sleep, we may discover the meaning of heaven on earth. And just as all thinking ceases in that state, so for the student entering this condition, all thoughts necessarily come to an end. It is hard for the European mind to conceive of such a state for man where consciousness exists without thought, but by practice and experience we may verify this. The electron theory of modern science provides us with an apt analogy for the overself. It represents the atom as a miniature universe resembling our solar system. At the center of this atomic system we have a charge of positive electricity, round which a cloud of negative electrical charges, the electrons, revolve. The positive and negative charges equilibrate each other so that the atom does not ordinarily break up. Thus there is a positive charge at rest at the center, and there are negative charges in motion around the center. The point of absolute rest, round which the electrons revolve, may be likened to the true self, and the electrons to its appurtenances, intellect, emotion, body. The overself of man is changeless. To find the soul is simply to recur to our original state. Purely divine beings were once in some far-off past, but untrammeled by the coverings of thought and body. Divine beings we are yet, but these later coverings have caused us to forget who we are. Hence, to pierce through them is to see our proper self. We must experience ourselves as we really are, not as prisoners of the body, as captives in the cage of thoughts or fettered by fleeting passions. Our consciousness is pinned down by these various forms. The whole art of meditation and concentration consists of unlocking our chains and rising up as free spirits. In an old Indian writing, I read the lines, "Before I had forsaken unity with thee, before I, fool, had made my body me, before I did not know thee who didst dwell in me, therefore I wandered through raging hells, because I threw away my very self, I therefore was in chains." The discovery of a new cinema star is hailed through the press of the entire world as a great event, but the discovery of a man's spiritual self takes place in utter silence, without the world's praise or its printed record. This path leads to an abiding quietude. Deeper and deeper we must penetrate, with focused mind, until we enter the realm where this blessed quietude reigns. A great peace will slowly invade your inner being. A strange, holy quietness will increasingly make itself felt. You will know that you are coming into the aura of the true self by the experience of a happy feeling. This is but the initial stage. The last is to have ecstatic union. Little by little, all the impressions of your immediate surroundings will be cut away. The world and its affairs will begin to recede, and when our minds are withdrawn from the hurried turmoil of our times and find their native state in such quiet moments, they become starred with sublime peace. As we pass into the inmost center of our mind, we arrive at a state where thought itself stops still, and where there seems at first to be nothing except the blissful consciousness of being, the sublime repose in infinite existence. This is the self we really are, the overself. Turning away from the world, I have forgotten both caste and lineage. My weaving is now in the infinite silence. Kabir, having searched and searched himself, hath found God within him. These lines were written many hundreds of years ago by Kabir, the poet-weaver of Benares. When, in our meditations, we seek to trace out the true I, and not merely sink into slothful acceptance of its manifold masks, we eventually arrive at an inner state which is really the most interesting in life. It is not unconsciousness, it is not sleep, it is not dream. Within its strange clasp, we become conscious of an intense awareness of infinitude. Entry into this condition temporarily transfigures a man's entire nature. We discard the petty and personal and discover our illimitable and divine nature. When we retired into the citadel of the soul, the moving panorama of sense impressions begins to fade out of sight. As we enter intimately into ourselves, the picture of the world which held us enchanted and robbed us of true self-consciousness begins to disappear. When we put the mind in repose and recollect who we are, our effort needs no further reward. We have secured balm for the day, and all life looks good. When the human mind stops its incessant action, when it empties itself of every image and idea, then does it become a clear mirror in which the ineffable divinity reflects itself. Our grave and learned skeptics will tell us that these spiritual ecstasies are mere derangements of the nervous system, Their cold brothers, the medicos, may likewise affix some such label as excessive blood pressure or whatnot. Others will mistake these records for the introspective musings of a solitary dreamer. But rather than reject these glimpses of the glorious possibilities of man with the contemptuous prejudice of misunderstanding, it were better for them to admit that they are too strange for their wits to follow, and thus quietly dismiss them for a while. Men may sit in solemn conclave to investigate these assertions, as some will. They would be wiser, however, if they investigated their own selves, for the experience of the eternal being within is its own best proof. It is in this strange manner that the man who follows this path of self-analytical meditation first awakens to the guidance of his intuition. When he begins to feel the inleading that will surely arise in the depths of his being, when he begins to yield himself utterly to it and lets it draw his consciousness still further into himself, when he willingly surrenders his personal thoughts, memories, and feelings and lets them drown in the impersonal current of life, which has mysteriously arisen of its own accord, when he submits to this profound guidance, he will be led right across the threshold of self-knowledge into the inner chamber where his real self awaits him. Once he gets even a momentary experience of this kind, he will understand something of what I mean when I speak of the spiritual being of man. He will realize that he has passed into a wonderful condition without the use of the five senses, without dreaming even, into something that is real and transforming and which he has never before experienced. In the cathedral-like silence of the soul, he will feel that merely to think is to make a sacrilegious noise. In this lofty mood, when he discovers the presence of his diviner self, he realizes he can best pay for the privilege by gathering all thoughts into a heap upon the sacred altar and sacrificing them. In this strange moment, the intellect temporarily cremates itself, and out of its ashes rises the phoenix of the true self, the imperishable overself of man.